Jay Weidner here. This is Reality Check. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate you guys all watching and building the channel, and we're getting bigger and bigger. And I hear I might be getting shadow banned or something. A lot of people are telling me that. I don't know. I hope not, because I like to make interesting programming, and I think this channel and this network needs to have interesting programming. So anyway, hit like and subscribe and all that other stuff. Today, we got two really special guests. It's going to be a really great program. I've got Michelle Hood. She's been on before. Lite the Light Pyramids, these beautiful pyramids that she makes that bring in all sorts of great energies into your home and make your house a sacred space. And we have Maria Wheatley, who is a writer extraordinaire, actually, written many books about Stonehenge and dousing and elongated skulls, and really the history of the area where she lives, which is in the Avebury area of England, which is probably the most astonishingly mystical place I've probably ever been. But anyway, hi you guys, how you doing?
Very well, thank you, Jay, and thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you for coming on. Hey, Michelle, how you doing?
Hey, Jay. I always love seeing both of you, so thank you for inviting me.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. All right, Maria. So you've written like a lot of books, and I've read most of them. Let's talk about. Let's start out with the Earth energies. And then we can go on from there and riff off of that, because I think once people understand where you're basically coming from, then they're going to understand the rest of kind of your narrative, I think.
Yes, well, I've studied Earth energies for about 30 years now, and I got interested in Earth energies and ley lines through my late father, who was considered a master dowser here in the UK. He inherited all of the unpublished surveys of another master dowser called Guy Underwood, who really investigated sites all across Europe. And so I was left a legacy. I was left, lots of surveys, and decided to investigate them for myself. And I've contributed more to the understanding of Earth energies. So what are Earth energies? Earth energies really are the veins and the arteries of our planet, of Gaia, of the Earth. They can be very strong or they can be very subtle. And the ancients seem to be able to manipulate some of the Earth energies. For example, it was discovered in 1988 by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, two very good dowsers of whom I've worked with. They discovered that around a ley line, there was two earth rivers, earth currents that encoiled it, a bit like the caduceus symbol. So if we imagine there's more to the ley than just a line, it can have these living earth currents meandering around it. And the ley seems to be able to anchor those two currents because they're never more than 10 miles away. So they're phenomenal types of earth energy that go all across the world. So the energies that go through Avebury, you said yourself, Jay, it's a fantastic place. The energies that go through Avebury will go on to go through to Uluru in Australia and Lake Titicaca as well. So they're global. Then we have different types of energy that are generated by the very deep waters within the planet, because Gaia, our planet, can generate water independent of rainfall. It's perpetual water as well, and that generates an energy pattern of a spiral. So that's two different types of earth energy that the ancients would look for to incorporate into their ancient sites. And the spiral pattern emitted by the very deep water normally marks the esoteric center of an ancient site, such as Stonehenge or Avebury, because it has baffled archaeologists why at Stonehenge is the altar stone not in the geometrical center. And this is because they were looking for the esoteric center of an ancient site. Now we can look at earth currents and geospirals, as they're called, that spiral pattern, as well as other earth energies, but those prevail the most with ley lines at ancient sites.
So you're talking about the ley line that goes through Avebury, and then if you keep following it, it goes all the way to Lake Titicaca. Is that what you're talking about there?
The lay will go a little bit over from that, but the earth currents that entwine that St. Michael lay that goes through Avebury, they go through Lake Titicaca, and they go on to Moscow as well. Then they sweep down to the four mountains in Bali. Then they go on to Uluru. So whatever happens energetically or ritual wise at Lake Titicaca will affect Avebury, will affect Moscow, will affect Bali, and so on and so forth, because there is no separation with these lines. They carry energy like a communication band.
So we can control the energies then, and make a better world if we find out how to do this on a collective scale, right?
Exactly. On a collective scale, Jay, you've really hit the nail on the head, because at Avebury Henge, you could fit in rather, it's being calculated by archaeologists, up to 2,000 people. Could you imagine 2,000 people with the same intent, knowing how to work these energy lines and influence the planet globally? That's their legacy, I feel. And because the super henges that were built in the late Neolithic, about 5,000 years ago, Orthodox dating, they housed thousands of people. It was the smaller stone circles are much later. They're towards the late Bronze Age. So we could have had thousands of people all over the British Isles, and there are 1,300 surviving stone circles in the British Isles, and it's believed that half of them were destroyed. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of people entering these sacred monuments and influencing the world in which they live.
Yeah, I was reading one of your books. I live in an area where we have a lot of deep underground hot springs. And I was at one of them. I was reading your book and your description of the different kinds of water. And I realized why this hot springs, made me feel so good after I had soaked in it, because it was a completely different kind of water than the stuff that falls from the skies, comes from, 2,000 feet under the ground. It was super hot coming out from under the mountains. And it has this completely different energy than just sitting in a bathtub or whatever.
Absolutely. And these different types of water, especially the water that's made within Gaia, has an energy field that rises up very, very high. So it's the water that is enriched, but the energy field around it as well is super conductive. And also water has memory. So on a very esoteric level, these places like your hot springs or the deep aquifers under Stonehenge and Avebury Henge, because there are large deep aquifer lakes of this very special water, become the Akashic record of place as well, because the water will hold on to all memory. So can you imagine now tapping into that? And when I take people from all over the world to these ancient sites, they too can tap in, and at some particular points people have the same image, where it is literally that Akashic record and spirits of place.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So let's get back to Avebury and all those things that are, in your opinion, who?
You're cutting out.
I am. Hang
Sorry,
on.
I missed that, Jay. You cut out. I apologize. I didn't hear.
It's okay. Who were the people that built all of those things in Avebury and in England? Who were they?
Well, up until relatively recently, into 2015, when I discovered the elongated skulled people that were placed around Stonehenge, it was believed that they were built by the Beaker culture, which looks like you and I. And indeed, by the time it's the mid-Bronze Age, which is around 1500 BC. Yes, you see people like us in the round barrows. Categorically, it cannot be denied because there's skeletal evidence. But when you go to the much older long barrows, then you find a completely different race of people. They had elongated skulls, more kind of this way. and they were very short because the femur bones were found with them. And once you have a femur bone, the long bone of the leg, you can estimate height. And these people were relatively short, but believed to be quite stocky as well. And they were the ones that built the first phases and the second phase of Stonehenge, and they moved the heaviest stones to build phase 1 of Avebury, which is the central features of the stone circles. And then another culture came along at Avebury and built the large stone circle surrounding it and the avenues. So when we look at a site such as Stonehenge or Avebury, we need to think it was 1,000 years of construction, tinkering with design at Stonehenge, built by these two different cultures. So it is again, I have proved it because I went to Cambridge University. It's a very prestigious university here in the British Isles, which I'm sure that you've heard of because we've heard of Harvard, so bound to have heard of Cambridge. And I went there to photograph and to measure the femur bones and the skulls. And instantly it's recognizable that their skulls are very different. But more than that, we have quite wide faces. And if you put a normal face around an elongated face that's been reconstructed, there's very narrow. And they're very different in the placement of the ears, for example. If you imagine we've got a long skull, but the ear is much further back, making their face look quite mythical, with kind of like a pixie-like ear or a fair ear of the fae. They're extraordinary to look at, and hopefully I'm going to get a whole skeleton completely measured out soon, so I'll be able to reconstruct an entire body rather than just have the femur bones and the skulls. But it's been a long process to access a full skeleton because of COVID and because of restrictions at these universities. Anyway, you have to write a paper to get in. You can't just knock on the door and say, can I photograph a skull, please? Because it doesn't work like that. You have to work quite hard to access these very prestigious universities.
Yes, I know that. I've been there. So is it possible that these people were part of some kind of worldwide effort to reinvigorate the place after maybe the Ice Age?
Yes, I think so, actually. I think, after the period of the Younger Dryas ending and the ice melting, as it were, whatever caused that, some people say it could be a comet, a plasma event, for example. Whatever occurred, that it did seem to galvanize the people to look geologically for what was going on beneath their feet. So at an ancient site, it's not just what you see in sight lines, astronomical sight lines, it's literally what's beneath your feet. They knew that if you have a meeting point of two aquifers, for example, that generates an extraordinary pattern in dowsable terms. But more than that, it generates a huge amount of electromagnetic activity. And it was the archaeologist Tim Champion here in the British Isles that discovered that most of the Neolithic monuments, in fact, every single causewayed enclosure, that's like an early henge monument, were constructed at the meeting point of two aquifers. So they were fantastic geologists. They could see what was beneath them. How did they have that technology? Is a question that one muses.
Well, clearly they were using dowsing to find the underground streams and then building their places wherever there was an intersection for power purposes, spiritual power, earth energies. Same thing's true with the cathedrals. They were built in the same kind of places. There was always a well underneath at the bottom in the crypt of the cathedral, and clearly they were you can just feel that they're on a seriously sacred piece of land, no matter where you are in Europe. So that also must have been like a carry-on of this same kind of attempt to straighten out things, maybe?
Pope Gregory, he decreed, for example, that, you know, to wipe out lingering pagan practices, to build churches upon ancient pagan sites. But the design canon changed slightly. So, for example, in the Neolithic and Bronze Age, they were looking for circular earth energy patterns or spiral earth energy patterns, especially the circular ones. They were deemed very sacred, and the Knights Templar looked for those, and that's why their constructs tend to be quite round,
Right.
so to speak. When it came to the medieval design of the Masons to do with the cathedrals, they changed the design canon to be the crossing point of two earth energies, literally in the land, a crossing point, a cross in the land. Yep. Or two lays that were crossing to form the cross. And that would go right the way down the axis line of a cathedral. But as well, when we come to places in France, like Chartres Cathedral, for instance, that was on the side of an ancient Druid core, C-O-R. Now, an ancient Druid core is a university. It's where they used to learn the sacred arts, astronomy, mathematics, etc. And even Oxford University is on an ancient Druid core as well, because they were looking for mind expanding energies. So if you can decode the earth, what's being sort of, you know, emitted there, you can place the most appropriate construct upon that. And when we look to places as a cathedral, did you ever go to Glastonbury Abbey, Jay, when you were in England?
Absolutely. Incredible.
I thought you probably would have, yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, for instance, at Glastonbury Abbey, it was discovered by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, the two dowsers I mentioned previously, that flowing down the axis line was a feminine wide earth current called Mary. Now, they called the currents Mary and Michael that entwined the St. Michael line because every 8 kilometers on the St. Michael earth current entwining the lay was a church dedicated to St. Michael. And the same holds for the Mary current. So coursing right the way down the axis line is the Mary current that crosses Michael at the altar. So that's really a very powerful place, masculine and feminine crossing. But whatever gender of an earth current or ley line flows down the axis line will decree who the church is dedicated to. So a feminine earth current or ley would be Mary or Catherine or Joan. If it's male, it would be Michael, Vincent, St. Peter's, etc. That gives an indication of the dominant energy at a particular place. But at Glastonbury, my late father discovered pulse points along the Mary line, which we showed Hamish, who discovered the Mary current. And these pulse points tend to be in 7s or 8s or 9s. And it's where the energy comes strongly out of the ground. And that can influence our chakras. So as one walks down the axis line, you can activate the chakra points, because in a modern Christian rite, they just activate the third chakra, the third eye chakra, with water anointed in the font. But in ancient tradition, you would walk ceremonially and processionally around an abbey or church. There were no seats. That came much, much later in the 17 and 1800s here. So we can activate our chakra system above these type of cathedrals as well. So they are certainly there to be used. And I've taken people to do that ancient rite at these places as well, all of whom have benefited from the experience.
Oh, definitely. If you're ever at Chartres Cathedral, definitely do the labyrinth. It's really worth it. It'll make you feel great for days. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So we have these energies, and we're not doing a very good job in our modern world of harnessing these anymore. Our glass and steel buildings are actually repelling these energies, and the square nature of our architecture also. So I'm like a big, huge fan of like tearing down the cities and rebuilding them in a sacred way. And maybe we can get Michelle to designed some of those buildings. And so what do you think about that? What about the future of all of this? Is there a way that we can, to do what the people in the past did at Avebury on a worldwide scale? I know it sounds kind of preposterous, but I feel that if we did that, it would change kind of the way that we perceive ourselves and each other.
Oh, absolutely. And, what a fantastic vision. And that's my vision as well, because it was found in the 1970s by Dr. Kathy Batchelor, who studied 11,000 homes across Europe, that the Curry net, which is roughly about 3.5 meters by 3.5 meters wide, if a child at school is sat on the crossing point of that energy grid, then they don't learn as well as their other contemporary peers. So just by looking at placement within a school, you can change the future of our children. And that's very important. The future lies within our children. And also there's a particular another grid that encompasses the planet that resonates to the energies of Mercury, communication. And this was another design canon, Jay, that was incorporated into churches and cathedrals, because where the pulpit was placed, where one speaks from, if you're the vicar or the father in the actual church, they would place the pulpit on the crossing point of the mercurial grid, and that's the so-called word of God. Now, it gives you a better way of communicating and channeling and that type of thing. But could you imagine, again, put in children that have maybe autistic problems, dyslexic issues, above that crossing point and energy field? Again, you can change lives overnight by simply knowing the art of placement.
That reminds me. Go ahead.
Actually, that's without even going into with what the earth energies can do for people. So I truly believe that if we look to what is beneath us and to what is above, stars, cycles of the sun, cycles of the moon, you bring that together, Gaia's energies with celestial energies, well, you've got a recipe for a more content, a more peaceful humanity, I would believe.
Yeah, I can imagine we could build temples again that are based on star alignments over these crossing points, and do it with great intention, and also reinvigorate the ones that are already built. And I think that would go a long way. Of course, most people have no idea what we're talking about, which is quite unfortunate. And so we have to go a long way into teaching people about all of this and why it's so important in a holistic way, because that's what you're really saying. That's what really alchemy is. It's this dance between, the energies coming from above and the energies coming up from below. I'm reminded when you were talking about children, the people don't realize that the dunce hat that they would put on, that's actually designed to bring energies down into the head of the person wearing it so that they become smarter. And it's not an insult against them. It's just an attempt to help them out because they're not getting the right energies back in the old days. Nowadays, none of us are getting these energies unless we go out and seek it, or we have Michelle's pyramids in our house like I do. So let's talk about, I'm still really fascinated. So when the elongated people disappeared and our type took over, did we get that information from about all of this from them, and we're able to retain it?
Well, there was a point which the recent DNA tests that have come out of Oxford are quite interesting, because they say that they don't call them elongated skull people, they call them the ancient Britons. They feel comfortable with that. And then you have the beaker European culture, and that's how they talk. But we will say elongated skulls and the beaker culture. There was probably 500 years of influence where they didn't even mix. They were separate, but eventually it seems that the DNA mixed together, and you had intermarriage. And I've discovered that the skulls that are halfway between, if you see what I mean. They're not exactly long and they're not exactly round. They're a middle skulled type of person, and they had completely different burial rites, because one of the things is the long skulled people were put in long barrows, and you never find a round skulled people in this area in that type of barrow. And the round skulled beaker culture were buried in round barrows that surround the ancient sites, of which there was once 800 round barrows surrounding Stonehenge, all finished off in chalk white, mirroring the 800 stars visible to the naked eye above. So it was a spectacular star planisphere around Stonehenge, which again, people don't really appreciate, because they only see the remnants of the ancient landscape. But it has been with LiDAR and with other technologies, you can see where the barrows were previously sited. So, I mean, that's an astonishing, beautiful, long lost fact about Stonehenge. And the people eventually mixed. And although at Stonehenge, what I discovered was that there was a lot of murdered, elongated skulled people, and they were showing defensive wounds. So they must have been attacked. I think there was at one time, probably around 2500 BC, using Orthodox dating, although I do think Stonehenge is much older than 2500 BC, but around that time, there was probably a struggle and a fight for Stonehenge for sure. But what one archaeologist called Tim DeVille found at Stonehenge when he was digging a bluestone, he found the holy grail of archaeology, which is carbon. And the two dates came out of the test. One, 2500 BC, beloved by every single archaeologist, every temple in the world, you may as well just say 2500 BC. And the older sample came out 8,000 years ago. But their policy is to use the younger date because it fits in with their neat little calculations, whether it's the pyramids of Giza to that date or the stones of Stonehenge to that particular date.
Well, that's kind of amazing, because I mean, I was just reading a mitochondrial study that said really the first white person was born about 8,000 years ago, which I found astonishing. I'm just wondering if that, I'm just wondering if that isn't the combination of these people when these people got together with the elongated skull people and created maybe possibly a kind of a new race, sort of like when the white people went to Mexico and they created a kind of a new race of people. I'm just wondering if that's maybe what happened. That I don't know, just speculation. But
yes, I think that's probably correct.
Yeah, and so I like the 8,000 date because it's closer to the 11,000, 12,000 year date of the end of the Younger Dryas, and when we had the massive flooding, and so you could have gotten, let's see, you could have, so the Europeans must have come from Europe over boat because the channel would have been still there, right? 6,000, 7,000 years ago, right?
Yeah. Previous to that, sort of, before the 6,000 years ago, actually, we were still attached to the continental mainland through Doggerland, which was a huge landmass, and dredging up, with oil companies now, they're dredging up artifacts. There's going to be probably pyramids beneath there, stone circles beneath Doggerland. It's literally unexplored. Really. So I think there's a lot between England and the continent yet to be explored.
Nice. So I was going to ask you, you may actually know this, about 25 years ago, a friend of mine who's actually a pretty famous photographer, I was at his house and he showed me a book, and it was photographs. It was a German woman. I believe she did this in the 50s, and she went and she photographed mountains all over the world, and they had human faces in them. And he lost the book somehow, because I called him up years later and said, "Man, tell me the name of that book. You ever encounter this book or anything like that?"
No, but I remember reading a family book in the sort of that was written in the 70s that mentioned these faces on mountains in France, for example, around Mexico. Yep. And they listed several places, and I've got that book in my library. I can check that one out. Who wrote that one? Yeah. And it goes into, so it doesn't probably go into the detail of which you wish you had that book, but it kind of skirts over it, so to speak.
Yeah, these were heavily eroded, of course, faces, but they were in Peru, they were in Afghanistan, they were all over the world, Australia, and literally hundreds and hundreds of photographs. A very rare book. And if anybody out there knows about this book, contact me, because I want to get a copy of it. I pay a lot of money to get it. So, it's as if there was this amazing civilization that existed before the catastrophe that happened, and somehow it survived and made its way to England and other places, right?
I think in England there was already quite a reasonable population here, because there's been some studies found. It's very interesting what you've just said, Jay, you know, that there was the first white person was relatively modern in terms of timelines, that Cheddar Man was found and reconstructed by some archaeologists, which is in Somerset, probably about an hour's drive from Stonehenge, not that far from Glastonbury. And Cheddar Man was found, and he had very dark skin but piercing blue eyes, it's thought. So that's how they're kind of looking at a very, very dark Mediterranean skin type for the elongated skull type of people as well. I see them as being quite Mediterranean looking, and it was the more Nordic peoples of the Beaker culture that brought more of a kind of white mid-tone skin color into the British Isles. So the kind of the archaeology is really changing quite fast, and when we've got a lot of younger archaeologists, they're far more open-minded than the kind of classical 1950s old school, as we say over here, following the same old mantra.
Of course, we know that Brian Forrester and his work, and I've been to his museum there in Peru, and they're Mediterranean and they have red hair. We don't know what color their eyes were because those can't get preserved, but they're definitely Mediterranean and definitely have red hair. And of course, then there's the red-haired people that they found in the caves in Nevada that they won't let us look at. And also red-haired giants have been found, skeletons all across the Southwest. And the Mormons are in particularly keeping a lot of this secret, stuff they found in Utah. I've talked to upper scale Mormons, and they've told me that are just unbelievable, what they found in these caves that are in Utah. So there just seems to be this like very advanced civilization that was all over the place, but our history books refuse to tell us about it. I have a copy of I think it's called, it's right back there in my bookcase. It's 1852 American Archaeology Magazine. I bought 10 issues on eBay for around $100. And in one of the issues, they talk that hundreds of years before Columbus arrived here, there were temples that would, make Abydos, tremble. There were buildings that would make, the Egypt look like small fry. And I'm reading this and I'm going, wait a minute, 1852, the archaeologists have just completely accepted that there was this extremely advanced civilization in America long before Columbus, and now it's all kind of wiped out. And and you can't find anybody that will talk about it. Yet the photographic record, if you really take a deep dive, you can find the remnants, I kid you not, photographs of remnants of cathedrals in the California deserts. And the photographs are from the 1880s. They are completely dilapidated cathedrals, Gothic cathedrals in California in the 1880s. I'm not kidding you. And I can't for the life of me figure it out. I've been wrestling with this for like 6 months now, and I can't figure it out. And how the history got stolen from us in a way.
Well, that's truly astonishing, to have, those type of constructs there. And it is a fact, like with my own work, Jay, it's about trying to get that which is repressed out into the public domain, because a bit like yourself, I bought some very old National Geographical magazines from the 1930s, because Malta had just been discovered, places like the Hypogeum in Malta, where they found long-skulled priestesses there. So I wanted to go right back to source, have a look at the photographs there, and categorically they said that they were there. And yet when I went to Malta at the Hypogeum a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, and I went into the new visitors center there, in a kind of comic font written on the wall was elongated skulls, aliens, really mocking. I did complain about that to Heritage Malta and asked for it to be removed, because it's a fact. It's not, a joke. So I think sometimes it's that we're in that culture where if we mock it and people have a laugh, it can't be true. And again, it's kind of trying to take away the layers of an onion to get to the true core of that which was.
That's right. I remember those findings in Malta. So the elongated people seem to have been all over the place, at least at one point, right?
Yes, probably, quite a global civilization, but different sizes and different builds. So like I said, the femur bones of the elongated skulled people here were very short. The men were no bigger than 5'4", and women on average were about 4'9", and that's relatively short even in today's standards. But when you go to different parts of the world, you can get much taller types of people, and with different builds, just like we have today. So I think there was different cultures, different races of elongated skulls. I don't think it's one shoe size fits all when we come to a global civilization. But one thing they did have in common was the ability to locate ancient sites and incorporate different energies, build with sacred geometry, and all of that to create these places where we still go today, feel the energy and feel better for it.
Absolutely. They're places of healing. Remember, they didn't really have doctors or anything. You had herbalists and we had shamans, but we didn't have anybody that could really, get in there and help and fix us. So we went to these places and we'd stay there and we would get better when we were sick. And that's what this is all about. And you go there when you're healthy and you just get healthier. That's what the whole thing is about. And that tragic break that we've had with the past, and that we don't even understand this anymore. So my real question to you is, did the elongated skull people just become assimilated, or was there a war? What do you think?
Both. I think at Stonehenge there was not a peaceful transition. The evidence is there, and it was, skull had been bashed in after skull, and sometimes very small children at the age of 6 were killed as well and put into mass graves. That is not a peaceful transition at Stonehenge. Elsewhere, when you go to the north of the country at an ancient site complex called Arbelow, which is called the Stonehenge of the North, they were being buried together. They were living together. There was not really that conflict there. And same really around the Avebury area. You don't find murder victims around the ancient sites. Stonehenge was a little bit different. I think that was the spiritual capital of the ancient British people. We know that there was people coming from Egypt because they were trading in those beautiful blue glass beads. We had people coming from Estonia, trading amber. So it was people from all over the known world, and probably, you know, the Americas alike. I'm sure that we always leave the Americas out, but you know, I think there was mass global movement, and that they were coming together in different parts peacefully, but at Stonehenge there was some kind of war. And then the land got divided up in the Bronze Age by the beaker culture, and kingship came in. So prior, when you're in the Neolithic long skulled age, there was no land division, there was no massive branch boundaries, as we call them. That's trenches carving up the land. That's mine, that's yours. It was more of an our culture with the Neolithic. By the time of the round skulled beaker culture, they divided up England and started kingship. And that has its roots in that. And it's that is the facts when you look at how the landscape was divided up in the Bronze Age.
I guess like Scottish law, right? They instituted boundaries, and because people were having so much infighting, and finally the kings just got tired of everything and instituted real estate, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, like I said, in the Neolithic, there was no land boundaries created. It was definitely communal. We even when they died, and it was a communal way of burying in a long barrow. You had sometimes up to 100 people at Tinkinswood in Wales. You had about 36 people at West Kennet Long Barrow near Avebury, for example. So it was a communal way of burying people. Whereas when it came to the Bronze Age, it was about the person. The person would be put in a flexed position, that's the fetal position, placed in a chalk crypt in the chalk bedrock, and then a mound built over top of them, and with grave goods. So that's saying that, you know, it's about me, the ego, and not about us. So that was a very changeable period, where we also went from a very feminine-based religious background with a goddess, emphasis on the moon at Stonehenge. One of the most accurate astronomical alignments at Stonehenge is not the midsummer sunrise. Any archaeoastronomer of worth and merit would say it's the moon's metonic cycle at its mid-swing. It's exactly above the heel stone every 9 years. And when it corresponds with a winter solstice, imagine being at Stonehenge at the winter solstice in that lunar cycle, when the moon is full near the winter solstice, it's an eclipse, and it rises blood red above the heel stone to the exact degree. Whereas if you look at the midsummer sunrise alignment, it's a degree out. And the most famous book written in the 60s by Richard Atkinson, the photographer moved off the access line by 6 feet to get the rising sun above the heel stone, whereas most archaeologists and astronomers know that that is not the most accurate alignment at Stonehenge. It was lunar, goddess based.
So then I guess the scientists, archaeologists are right when they say the Stonehenge is a calendar, but it's so much more than just that. And the calendar is necessary to discover the exact alignments, so that your rites and your rituals are being done at the right moment, right?
Yes, I mean, if we look at the trilithons alone, that's the horseshoe feature in the middle of Stonehenge, so to speak, giant. They weigh up to 90 tons each, and they're too narrow to walk through. You can't, as you know, Jay, you can't walk through one of the trilithons. You can walk through the linteled stone circle on the outside. So clearly they weren't meant to walk through, they were meant to look through. And when you start looking through that narrow gap at the top, and it's Google it if you don't know what a trilithon looks like. They've got very narrow gaps at the top, and that's when the moon could align to it. And then at particular times of what's called the eightfold year, you get a whole calendar just by those 5 trilithons alone. So now at this time of the year, where we're coming up to Samhain, a very Halloween festival to the ancient Celtic peoples, if you stood just to the left of the greater trilithon, and now you're looking west, you would see the sunset, because it's a sunset calendar focused on the west. And I've got the lunar alignment through one of the trilithons, where the full moon literally fits in like a glove into that window frame at the top of the trilithon. So the moon literally engulfs it. And as you're looking up, and they're big, aren't they, Jason? You are literally looking up really high. You see the moon perfectly fitting into that gap. And the light seems to really make that top part of Stonehenge monument, the trilithon, glow with moonlight. It's a very lovely sight to behold.
I'd like to see that. I bet it is. So people at home listening and watching, they don't have access to any of, to Avebury or anything. They're out in the middle of the suburbs somewhere. What do you suggest that they do to try to emulate some of these energies, around their house?
Yes, I mean, there's earth energies everywhere. They're just, at major sites above really powerful ones. But we can, empower ourselves in our own home by working with the earth energies that prevail there. So, for example, and this is what Dr. Kathy Batchelor discovered, just by looking where a cat sits naturally, not for fussing, but where it is, they tend to like very strong, slightly toxic earth energy. So avoid those places, where the cat might sleep in the garden and that sort of thing. Whereas where a dog lays down, naturally not to be fussed, that's a very good place to have, maybe a seat over, something like that to rest above. And if, you've got just basic dowsing ability, you can look for female earth energy currents, you can look for male earth energy currents. And if you have a male earth energy current flowing through your property and you need to have slightly more energy, be a bit more invigorated, for example, have a recuperation after an illness, and that would be the ideal spot as well. Not necessarily to sleep above, but to interact with, to gain more energy. Whereas the female earth currents, they tend to relax you a little bit more. Look for trees in the north. I don't want to get the geography rather wrong of your country, but I think in the kind of Boston area you have hemlock trees. Over here we have what's called yew trees, and they tend to like the really powerful healing energies. That's a spiral pattern, for example. And so cherry trees like positive energy, all of which are grown naturally. So that's what we would look for, those type of trees. And then with a little bit of dowsing, you can decode your home and start using it a little bit differently to gain health. Because I have doused some very major houses. For example, Lord Bath, Alexander Finn, has a mansion in Wiltshire, and he invited me over to decode some of the land. But he knew it anyway because it was designed by Masons, and he instantly said, "I know I live above the spiral energy." I didn't even mention I was going to be looking for spirals, and that's the first thing he actually said to me. So when you're above that spiral type of energy, it will give you a better, longer life. So again, we can increase, our health by looking to that which is below.
Yeah, so I live on top of a giant aquifer, one of the biggest aquifers in the world. And we get like 6 inches of rain a year here. But I live on top of this aquifer, and I just wonder, how can I investigate the energies of the water that I'm living on top of?
Yes, I mean, what you could do is find out if it's how much groundwater it contains compared to probably more deeper water, and
Deeper
that's
water.
normally a bit of a mix, so to speak. It will have some groundwater, but if you're only having 6 inches of groundwater a year, then that is going to be very, very deep harmonic energy field that you're living above. So it's all over to yours then to get some good energy.
I was just wondering because I was reading Wilhelm Reich years ago, and he said that living above, underground water is anti-orgone. And so I was trying to figure that out, why that would be, right? Why would it be
Yes.
anti-orgone? And so it kind of worried me a little bit, which is why I put Michelle's pyramids all over my house, because I was wondering if I was counteracting maybe some of the de-orgone, I think he called it.
Yeah, that's groundwater. What he's saying, there's two different types of water. The groundwater that falls from the from the sky, that is carcinogenic to live above. Any dowser would tell you that, and geomancer. But if it's associated with much deeper water, that energy field tends to negate the groundwater and energy field. And with Michelle's pyramids, which I must admit are amongst the finest in the world, hand finished off pyramids, I would highly recommend them. They are extraordinary, and I'm sure Michelle spends a lot of time making these pyramids. So with those in there, it would negate the little groundwater that you have.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's deep underground water by how deep the drill is. So, for the wells and things, and the mountains of putting it out like ancient water, and so that's gratifying. And also, the place I live is one of the hot spots in the United States for UFO sightings, for all sorts of weird things that go on here in the San Luis Valley. And so we're not only living on top of this giant aquifer, but there's all sorts of weird stuff going on all the time. I wonder if there's any kind of relationship. Like, does Avebury have a lot of UFO sightings?
Yes, yes, it does actually, and so does Stonehenge. And wherever you seem to have large amounts of underground water aquifers, it has been noticed that you do get UFO activity. Because quite often, if there's a very large amount of underground water under pressure, by rocks kind of forcing in on it, it generates even more of a complex energy pattern that is really high in electromagnetic energy and creates a vortex. So you've got a lot of things going on with water under sustained pressure, and I think that contributes towards UFO activity as well. They seem to be attracted to the underground water, and especially the vortex that's generated by some of the energy patterns associated with it. And I did a show a few years ago now with the UFO hunters, a lovely bunch of American chaps actually, and we did a whole show special on Stonehenge, vortex energy. And Stonehenge is surrounded by military establishment after military establishment. You can't get away from that, and they added that into the equation. A large aquifer, vortex energy, military, sacred sites, they will always come together with a lot of ley lines. So yes, it does have large amounts of UFO activity. 2 years ago now, a very close colleague of mine saw a UFO being escorted by two helicopters going across the sacred landscape, heading for what's called the Salisbury Plain. And the Salisbury Plain is a bit like your Area 51. It's complete military, and you cannot have civilian access to that. And guess what? It's got the most interesting long barrows, complete with long-skulled people still in there, that is not allowed any access whatsoever, not even to the archaeological community, because they call it the danger firing zone. So there's so much archaeology out there yet to be discovered, but not a chance of getting out there.
Yeah, it's weird how the military seems to understand what you're talking about. And even here in the United States, there's several military bases that are on incredibly sacred places of land, and Fort Lewis up in Washington State, right next to Mount Rainier, and just odd. There's a secret base here too, in this area. But yeah, it's very odd that they know that. So my theory is that from all of my studies and alchemy and esoteric work, and it fits very well into what you're saying, is that the Earth is the planet, but the Earth is also has a invisible field around it that is made out of plasma, and it's electromagnetic in nature, and that has beings that live in this field. And sometimes you can see them, actually. And they're made out of plasma. They're like animals and humans in some ways, but they're not made out of flesh. They're made out of plasma. And what you're doing is you're finding these upwellings of this plasma energy. And when it connects from the sky to the earth, you're creating these vortexes that are extremely powerful. And I think that's the reason the military builds their bases where they are.
Yes, I mean, to the kind of, the old Western magic occultist, surrounding the earth as you're describing, that plasma was called the astral light. And the astral light, so that's just a term, as it were, is interactive with us as well. Just like earth energies, you can interact with that because it's all consciousness and there is no separation. So we can interact completely with the energies of where we live, just by communicating and understanding the earth. And when we kind of look to how the military use it, again, they will be using it on the sacred days. For example, that eightfold year, it's of no coincidence, that Boris Johnson, every time that we have to vote for something under his directive, it's on Midsummer's Day, it's on Beltane, it's at the full moon. And even the most famous battle fought in the World War II on the British Isles, called the Battle of Britain, ended at Samhain on October the 31st. It suddenly ended on one of those sacred days, and that's when the whole kind of aura of the earth, the aura astral light of the earth energies is very, very receptive. We say over here, as you've probably heard time and time again, Jay, the veil is thin on those days, and that's when you can interact between the two worlds, the other world and this world.
Yeah, there's a saying on Wall Street, a really good stockbroker uses statistics. A really great stockbroker uses astrology. And and it's true,
like
by the way. Yeah, it's true. I guarantee you, I know guys who've made millions on Wall Street, and they're complete 100% into woo. They're completely into all of this stuff. And you wouldn't look at them, they got, $400 suit on and their Maserati and all that. But then you go to their house and they got crystals everywhere. And it's just the most incongruous thing I've ever seen. But it's true. Well, Michelle, what do you got to say?
Well, I was This was fascinating. So I was really happy to listen. Thank you so much. I would like to say that I have taken classes with Maria so I could learn around my house and around the area what would be beneficial. So even setting up the pyramids out there or just sitting in the grass, because I learned that there's breathing exhales and inhales, and it was totally fascinating. So people could, take a class like this and douse around their house and find out if there's any weird energies under their bed or outside where, this kind of thing. I would love for Maria to share that because I really learned a lot. And this is a fascinating show, by the way. Thank you both.
Please tell us how can someone do that, Maria?
Oh, well, that's very kind of you to say, Michelle. Michelle's also discovered pulse points in the Valley of Fire, wasn't it? That kind of like, what's it, Glastonbury Abbey, those pulse points. And if people want to find more about my courses, they can go to my teaching platform, which is esotericcollege.com. And my travel platform is the Avebury experience.co.uk. And hopefully I'll be going to Egypt in March with Brian Forrester as part of his research team, which I'm looking very forward to, and hopefully Peru in next November. So have a look on my website for those interested in going to Egypt with Brian and Patricia Arwion. She is an expert on ancient Egypt in her own right, as indeed Brian is. And I'll be kind of introducing people to the discoveries of the earth currents that I made in ancient Egypt as well, and how they could have been used to increase agricultural techniques.
That sounds amazing. One time when I was in Egypt with the History Channel, I got to stay in the King's Chamber for a full hour without anyone coming in, which was amazing. So I laid down in the sarcophagus, which isn't a sarcophagus, but I laid down in it anyway, because it was the only place to lay down. And as soon as I touched my head down to the floor of the thing, I saw every single person that had ever visited the King's Chamber. I mean, I saw thousands and thousands, and would flash for like 20 minutes. I saw Napoleon, I saw Aleister Crowley, I saw kings and princes, and I knew who they were too. That was what was weird, is I knew who they were. And it was an amazing experience. And it's this the Akashic record is buried in these places, and you can source it, and you can get information for free. So how does someone, they go to your course, but just right now, just quickly, how would someone, if they wanted to find out where their negative and positive areas around their house, what would you suggest they do besides? I do like the analogy about the cat. So you're saying the cat is absorbing the negative energies, right?
Yeah, that's what research has shown. Absolutely, they're good tips. A really easy thing to do, which takes away all of the kind of terminology of dowsing and having to know things. And this was discovered by Dr. Kathy Batchelor. So I always like to credit those which discover things. So you've got a dowsing rod. I got a dowsing rod. You could even go as into your cupboards and get a piece of metal from a coat hanger. It doesn't have to be a sophisticated piece of dowsing equipment. So you could just bend a piano wire, coat hangers, whatever, and make a little handle. So it's like an L shape. That's all you need, is something like that's an L shape. Stand in the doorway of your bedroom with the door obviously open. So you're stood in that doorway, and then you just say mentally or out loud, show me the best place for my bed for my good health. And then the rod will move. And that's the easiest way to find out the best place to sleep in your house. And it's very easy to do. Anyone can do it. I've had little kids find out the best place for their beds by doing that in the doorway. So it's something that is quite empowering, because there are signs of geopathic stress. If you're suffering from negative earth energies, the body will manifest particular things. You'll start to grind your teeth. That's a classical sign of geopathic stress, for instance. You will wake up fatigued. You might sleep a little bit awkwardly in the bed, where your kind of knees, you might wake up in a kind of bit of a strange position, because your body, when it's asleep, knows that it's trying to avoid a particular point in the bed, if you see what I mean. So have a think about how you wake up. If you wake up normally, then you're probably on, good earth energy. And there's a lovely old English saying about where to build an old farmstead. And that is, build your farm where the sheep doth lie. Because again, animals know intuitively, instinctively what's good for them. It's us that have got the disconnect with Earth. Well, some of us have a disconnect with Earth. So they just used to watch where animals lie down. Horses like good earth energy, cattle like good earth energy. Things like mosquitoes and gnats and bacteria, it was discovered with dowsing research, are all attracted to negative types of earth energy. So, look for where gnats are, insects are. That will tend to be negative earth energy as well. Fruit-bearing trees, berry-bearing trees, they like positive earth energy. So again, looking around at nature will tell you a lot of what's going on. I mean, when I used to well bore for farms, I don't do that now, but I used to go into the field of where they would want to place the well for the cattle, and I'd look around, and they always said, "Oh, you look so mystical, Maria." And I thought, well, I'm not. I'm looking for molehills. I'm looking for where rooks go. I'm looking on the ground. So lots of different indications. Nature tells us an awful lot.
Well, that's really good information. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, listen, it's been a great show, Maria and Michelle, two of my favorite people now. Michelle, of course, makes Lite the Light Pyramids. We'll put a link to that. And Maria Wheatley's books can be found on Amazon, all over the place. Definitely worth reading. She's a very good writer, and she very succinct in how she explains things in ways that a lot of us can't enunciate. So I really appreciate what you're doing, Maria, and I'd love to go to Egypt with you. I bet that it's going to be fun.
Thank you very much for having me, Jay. It's been great, and it's always great to have a really knowledgeable show host as well, and you've made me feel very comfortable and very welcome. Thank you for that.
You bet. I really enjoy your presence. And Michelle, I want to thank you for coming on. I know you didn't get to say as much as you used to when you come on, but your presence was noted, and thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. You two are two of my favorite people also. I learned so much from both of you. And Jay, you asked every question and more that I could have ever thought of. So it was perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching Reality Check. I'm Jay Weidner, and hit subscribe and like and all that. And I'll see you probably in a week or so.